next guest today is KEMAL Evans, master grower and consultant over in the BC area. How are you doing, sir?
I'm excellent. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. You know, it's another day just watching the market in cannabis and mining as well. Lots of rockets, lots of things going down, but for this particular interview with you, we're actually going to be skipping away from the actual investment side of things, but more so going into cannabis in general, because a lot of people, although they do invest in cannabis, and a lot of people are right now, how many people out there actually truly understand the plant and understand where the market might be going and different technologies coming up? That's what we want to focus on. I've heard one of your podcasts before. You're definitely the man to be speaking to.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And now for yourself, in a more specific question, you know, we're looking at the cannabis sector. You're looking at it from an investment side. Obviously, it's ramping up, but from cannabis as an actual commodity or a product and the sector and where it's going, where do you see where we are right now just compared to a couple of years ago, and where do you think we're going to be going in 2019? What are the hot topics in cannabis going to be?
I think one of them will definitely be tissue culture, which is a form of micro-propagation where you're taking a very, very small piece of a plant. You're able to take that small piece and turn it into 4 pieces. And you take those 4 pieces and turn them into 32 pieces. And it just gets exponentially bigger and bigger and bigger until you have all of these little stable cuttings of plants sitting in agar. And then when you need to actually pull the trigger and send someone like Tilray, say 30,000 plants, you can send them 30,000 plants that are identical. Everyone is exactly the same. Everyone is pathogen free. And so by the time they grow them out, the chances of there actually being a disease or anything that comes in and affects your yield or anything like that is very, very minimal. Right now, what everyone is doing is we're all taking cuttings from mothers. We have mother plants, and some people step off plants where you have a whole bunch of plants that are in veg, and then you take cuttings from those, and then you cuttings from those, and take cuttings from those. And there is some fear in the industry that as you clone and clone and clone a plant, the genetics actually get tired. So tissue culture is going to be a really, really big one moving forward, especially in craft where you don't have a lot of space and you don't really want to be gobbling up that space trying to rear plants. You just kind of want to take plants in, flower them, and then on to the next, take new plants in, flower them on to the next. So definitely watch out for that. That's going to be a really big part of the cannabis industry moving forward for sure.
Yeah, and that's really interesting that you say that, actually, because when it comes to people who just continue to take clones over and over and over again, what many, again, going back to investors just to tap into this, what many people don't realize is that, you know, everyone's saying, oh, we've got these 3 million square foot facilities, we're growing this much, we're going to do this. There's so many promises, but not many, except for the elite companies that are currently, you know, the elite LPs in Canada right now, not many of them have gotten to that point. And quite frankly, I don't know if many of them will get to that point, because it's not easy to grow cannabis in large amounts whatsoever. So it's interesting to hear that. Are there any companies currently that you know of who are doing it this way?
There are a couple companies that are just kind of getting started, but it takes a really long time to get your stock up because, like I said, you're only starting with a very small piece of the plant and putting that in agar, and you keep it almost in stasis until it's time to pull the trigger. I don't know of any companies off the top of my head that are really far along in tissue culture. I know everyone who is taking this seriously is definitely looking at it as the only viable means for mass production. It's really the only way that you can get away with being able to flower that at once. And then on top of that, I just did a consult for a group up on the northern tip of Vancouver Island, and their projections were like you would expect, where they thought, okay, you know, we're going to fire up our facility and we have 10 rooms and we're going to have 10 rooms flowering. It's going to be great. I'm like, that 2-month flowering cycle, if somehow by magic you were able to get every single room populated with plants, who are you going to hire to harvest all these plants at the same time? Because you're talking about thousands of people that you would have to have, or hundreds of people at least working around the clock to be able to harvest these. So you also have to take into account that you have to stagger your harvest. Each room has to come on and off at a certain time. You have to know exactly when that's going to happen. So it takes a lot of scheduling.
And it's funny that you say that, because I've actually spoken to some companies, usually smaller ones, and I'll ask them certain questions, and they'll look at me like, "Oh, that's a good question." I'm like, "I know, that's why I asked it. You have millions of dollars in your system, and you haven't even started that yet." But tissue culture, that's really interesting. I'll be looking out for that for certain companies to see which ones adopt that, because it sounds like it's got a lot of longevity for it, and it sounds like it's where the industry is going. But not just growing plants, obviously, in this industry. We've only recently started actually talking about the different cannabinoids and how it relates to our endocannabinoid system and the different medicines and different products coming out. Are there any things that you're excited about that you've heard, whether it be like CBL, CBG, CBD, that you're like, wow, I knew about this, I can't wait until this gets mainstream and actually is a product you can grab on the store?
So I guess the most exciting for me right now is the fact that they just recently found that they can harvest cannabidiol, which is CBD, from hops. And being that CBD is still considered a scheduled substance, just like THC, and is controlled, we can't import CBD from the U.S. legally right now. There's a few groups that can, but there's a lot of red tape attached to it. But in the U.S., they've now been able to harvest CBD from hops, and so that makes it not a controlled substance, and so that opens up a whole other side of the market, and that's really exciting. And then you have cannabigerol, which is, we're getting some delay here. That's okay. Cannabigerol is CBG, which is kind of like the stem cell of the cannabis plant. And all of the other cannabinoids are actually formed from CBG, with the exception of a few. And there's some really exciting work going on with neurodegenerative diseases. I'm seeing in my consulting people using it for stuff like Parkinson's or Huntington's disease, and then the terpenes, which are like the unsung heroes of the cannabis plant. Something like myrcene that you find in hops is really relaxing and sedative. You can use it for people that are having trouble getting to sleep and staying asleep. And then you have stuff like linalool, which is really exciting. You find that in lavender, and they just did a clinical trial that I was checking out for an article that I'm writing for a magazine. And in this trial, they were using vaporized lavender oil, and people who had chronic pain and were taking opioids for their pain were able to take 50% less opioids when they were breathing in this vaporized lavender oil, which is linalool, which you find in copious amounts in lots of different strains. So there's going to be a lot of new medicines and new applications for cannabis that people didn't even think of. As well, you're going to see a lot of other nutraceutical plants being mixed with the cannabis plant once people are able to get proper dealer's licenses and make these formulations.
Yeah, and I love that point that you brought up when it comes to opioids, because a lot of people know that cannabis is, you're able to use cannabis to help you with pain, but I'm sorry, when you come to really chronic pain, there's still going to be, at least for right now, there's going to be a need for still having your oxycodone or your Tylenol 3s, whatever it be. But to be able to find a natural plant like cannabis, or even a terpene from cannabis, and be able to have the same effects with using so much less of a dosage, I truly believe, like, I watch sports all the time, and it's so sad when you see these people from the NFL or hockey, whatever it be, and they start getting addicted to these drugs because they use it so much with their careers. If we can find ways to get them natural products that are much less addictive, if not no addictive properties to it, and you're having a much lower dose of these pain medication, you can quite literally change the entire space when it comes to pharmaceutical drugs that are for pain. But it doesn't stop there. It goes to gut rot. And like you said, it goes to Parkinson's. I watched some guy take some THC oil, and he had his Parkinson's, and he was shaking around, and then all of a sudden he was calm. And he was able to go. I know certain people. There's someone I used to work with. Her son has Angelman disease, I believe that's what it's called, but also epilepsy, severe epilepsy. And because of cannabis, he now has almost no or very few seizures, opposed to the dozens that he was having a week. It's changing people's lives, and we've suppressed it for so long. And we're at the very beginning of it really taking off. And what companies are going to take over this? I know Canopy Health. I don't know if you looked into them much. Last I checked, they had 29 patents pending for cannabinoids and different things, for sleep deprivation, for all that. It's incredible how our bodies intake cannabinoids, and we really, I don't know about you, I know you know a lot more than I do, we almost still have no clue for all these other purposes we could be using it for.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true, and it's interesting that you brought up the sports medicine and the application of cannabinoids in sports medicine, because you have a lot of people who are my wife's brother. He's actually had some pretty brutal injuries to his brain playing sports, aggressive sports, not even that aggressive, but playing lots of sports. And cannabigerol is something that's actually regenerative. It's able to help your body create new brain cells. And then you have THC acid, which is neuroprotective. So it's actually helping your body mend damaged neurons and brain cells. So it's a really, really exciting time for cannabis medicine and for sports medicine. And there's something else that you said that really struck me. But anyways, one thing that I did want to talk about was Lyme disease, and that is prevalent. It's becoming almost a pandemic. It's so rife in the States, and I've been working a lot with Lyme disease in my consulting, and I found that there's a lot of cannabinoids and terpenes that are actually able to kill a lot of the bacteria and co-infections that come with Lyme. And I've actually had a few people get into full remission from Lyme disease, where when I met them, I shook their hand and they were lying in bed because they hadn't been out of bed in a couple of years. And after 6 weeks working with them, they were actually able to get out of bed and start living their life again. So there's so much that's happening and so many exciting things, and a lot of different places where people can invest and make money while people are getting the help that they need, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I've never heard of Lyme disease before. I've never heard of that. And this is something I actually look into because it fascinates me just from a standpoint of fascination. But also, like you said, I do want to invest in these companies that are going down this road because I think it's going to be a remarkable turning. Like, the entire pharmaceutical industry is going to be turned upside down by this in many different ways. But Lyme disease, I never knew that.
Yeah, it's wild how many people actually have it. And then on the production side, I've been doing a little trial for an LED company called ALD Green Tech, and it's really interesting. It's the first time I've actually ever seen flowers that were decent grown under LED lights. That, and I went and checked out Remo. I don't know if you know Remo. He's an age-old cannabis activist, but I went and checked out his garden. He was growing under LED lights as well. And something that's not getting a lot of light right now is the power that's going to be needed to grow all of this cannabis, because as so much as we're growing it in greenhouses on huge scale like Canopy and Emerald and companies like that, with passive solar where you're actually using some of the daylight, a lot of companies are growing just solely indoors. And when you're using that much power and you're growing year round, you're trying to cool the summer and you're trying to heat the winter. You're growing with these really inefficient high intensity discharge lights like the Gavitas and stuff like that. They're amazing lights and they produce a really great product. But once we have enough producers in Canada, they're going to be gobbling up a monumental amount of power. And I think it's important that we start really researching green technologies for cannabis production, like water capture, water recapture, having your humidifiers feeding all that water that they're taking out of the air and purifying it and feeding it back to the plants. LED, like I said, is a really big one. So I'm really excited to see more research and more trials going into ceramic metal halides and more efficient lighting, because a lot of companies just roll in, they're like, hey, what works? We want this to work. We know that works. We're going to go with that. Even if it isn't the most efficient, they know that it works and it's tried and tested. And then you have other companies like Raven's Quest up north where they're going the opposite route. They're doing all these really new technologies that aren't proven, which is also kind of risky. But kudos to them for trying to be green.
Yeah, and Marican, one of the reasons why I invested in the first place is their facility is actually 92% to net zero for carbon emissions to all that, because they do that. They looked at, okay, we know that cannabis prices are going to really come down, and this is something important. This isn't just American. This is the entire industry. If you're not having a facility that can cut down your costs in every way form. It's not cheap growing cannabis. And although I don't think it's going to happen the same in Colorado and Washington where the prices were dramatically slashed, because we do have exports, we have areas for our supply to start going when our supply finally reaches and surpasses demand. But it's going to come down. It's not going to be $10 a gram for everybody. There's going to be your Canadians and your Coronas. There's going to be your buck of beers out there. If Ford is here in Ontario, he's going to $1 a gram. Who knows what he does? But there's going to be cheaper cannabis, and you have to be able to compete. And from a green standpoint, from just not wasting that much energy, but also from the standpoint of a company that needs to have good profit margins. It's very important to look at these things, and it'll be interesting to see the evolution of the lighting and of these different elements. And who better to know than a master grower who's currently or always looking for the newest, best things to do for his plants.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time, and one thing that I find really stifling about the whole market is Health Canada's approach to labeling and packaging. I think that it's going to become a gating item for people to really know what they're getting and source what they need. I've been studying a lot on the testing of cannabis. Like I said, I've been working with a company called Blockstrain that is all about mapping the genome of the cannabis and making sure that the producers know exactly what they're getting, and that way the consumers know exactly what they're getting. If you're buying CBD oil for your child, the last thing you want is for there to be a mistake and all of a sudden your child is getting THC. So being able to map out what the plants are and know what they are on both ends at all times is absolutely imperative in this industry. And I think it's really exciting that you have companies that are actually trying to do that from like the ground level. And with Health Canada being so restrictive about what you can say and what you can show on your packaging, it's really hard for consumers to be able to buy their medicine or buy their recreational products with confidence, knowing exactly what's in them, because it's so restrictive on what you could say is in them.
Yeah, and we're going to be figuring it out for a long time, but you know what? They took a cautious approach to it. This is something new. It's different. It hasn't been around for 80, 90 years, however long Prohibition's been going. It's been a heck of a long time, but it's really, really exciting that Canada's at the forefront. We've got people like yourself who are constantly looking for the next big thing and helping this process move along. And just from an investor standpoint, from an economist standpoint, and from just a citizen of Canada and of the world, this plant's going to change so many people's lives. It's been exciting talking to you about that. I hope to be able to get you on again as you continue these tests and continue these different developments, because myself, I know I want to learn more about this, but also for all of our different viewers as well. You got to learn about the companies that you're investing in, and that means learning at what they're doing to know who's doing it well, who's sucking up all the energy, and they're not going to be able to compete in 2 years, and who has a facility that they've been able to decrease the cost of the electricity. They're reusing their water, and they're actually moving forward. So really interesting talk. I appreciate you taking the time to come on here, and if you're up to it, I'd love to do this again soon in the very near future.
Absolutely, man. Thank you very much for having me.
Appreciate it.